Picture this. The year is 1405. You're standing on the deck of a treasure ship in the South China Sea. The air hits you like a wall, 30 degrees Celsius heat, 90% humidity. You can feel the moisture trying to crawl into your lungs. Fresh meat? It rots in hours down here. European sailors are dropping like flies. Their food is so toxic, they call it salt junk. Scurvy alone will kill 2 million sailors over the next few centuries. But right now, on this Chinese ship, 27,000 men are eating meat that's been preserved for months. No ice, no refrigeration, no modern science. Just 3 layers of defense that we're still using today. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how they did it. Year 1405. Dawn breaks over the harbour. 317 ships prepare to launch. 27,000 men board vessels that stretch 400 feet, longer than a football field. This is a floating city about to disappear into the unknown. Their destination? Southeast Asia, the Indian Ocean, the coast of Africa. Every mile will take them deeper into equatorial hell, where wood turns green with mold overnight, where food becomes poison before you can blink. Here's what's waiting for them out there. European ships sailing the same waters are losing half their crews to starvation and disease. But these Chinese sailors, they'll return home months later, well-fed and healthy. Today, we are looking into an organized warfare against time, bacteria and decay. 3 barriers, 3 weapons in an ancient arsenal. Layer 1, salt that executes bacteria at the molecular level. Layer 2, wax seals that create perfect vacuums 500 years before we invented vacuum sealers. Layer 3, chemistry that rewrites meat's biology to make rot impossible. 3 layers, 3 different sciences, 1 incredible system. Let's reverse engineer it. So here's the first enemy they had to face, the same killer that's been destroying food since the dawn of time, and that is bacteria. But here's what most people don't understand about bacteria. They don't just eat meat. They need something very specific to survive. Available water. Not just any water, free water. Water that isn't locked up in salt or sugar molecules. Scientists call this water activity. It's measured on a scale from 0 to 1. Fresh meat sits at 0.99. Paradise for bacteria. Drop below 0.90. Most bacteria suffocate and die. The Chinese Navy needed to crash that number fast, because in tropical heat, here's what happens. Your meat becomes a bacterial breeding ground in hours. Not days, hours. 1 contaminated barrel could sicken dozens of men, cripple your crew, end your mission. In 1405, food poisoning wasn't just uncomfortable, something that you forget, and it goes away. It was a death sentence. So what did they do? They weaponized salt. But not the way you're thinking. This technique goes back over 1,000 years. It's called pressure curing. They don't sprinkle salt like seasoning. They attack the meat with it. Step 1. Bury the meat in a thick crust of salt. Not a dusting. A burial shroud. Step 2. Now comes the brutal part. They massage it, press it, drive the salt deep into every muscle fibre. They repeat this assault for weeks. Each round drives salt deeper into the tissue. The result? Meat so dense and hard it could double as ship timber. It looks like just a simple layering on the outside, but here's what's actually happening at the molecular level, and this is where modern food science quietly appears. Imagine a bacteria cell as a water balloon floating in your swimming pool. Now imagine someone dumps the entire Dead Sea into that pool. What happens to your balloon? The salt concentration outside becomes so intense that water gets violently sucked out through the membrane. The balloon doesn't just deflate, it collapses, shrivels, dies. That's exactly what salt does to bacteria. The salt creates osmotic pressure so extreme, it pulls water straight through the cell wall. The membrane collapses. The bacteria dies. Here's the scale we're talking about. A single barrel of properly salted beef contained over 50 pounds of salt. That's enough to crash water activity down to 0.75 or lower. At that level, even the toughest bacteria can't survive. Ming provisioning manuals describe this method most clearly in the preparation of la roux, a category of heavily salt-cured pork used for long storage and transport. The process is explicit. Apply salt in layers, press with force, repeat until the flesh becomes firm and dry. They didn't know about water activity or osmotic pressure, but they knew it worked. Here's what matters. Most people think salt just keeps things fresh. It is more than that. Salt creates a molecular desert where life cannot exist. The Chinese Navy understood this principle 600 years before we had microscopes to see bacteria. But here's the problem. Salt has one fatal weakness in the tropics, and if the Navy couldn't solve it, their entire food supply would turn into a rotting nightmare within days. Because salt doesn't just pull water out of meat, it also pulls water in from the air around it. Picture this scenario. Your meat is perfectly salted, water activity is crushed, bacteria are dead. You load it onto the ship, set sail into the South China Sea, and then disaster strikes. The air in the tropics carries 90% humidity. The atmosphere itself is saturated with water. And salt? Salt is like a molecular sponge. It absorbs moisture from the air around it. So your perfectly dried salted meat starts drinking water back in from the humid air. The salt gets wet. The meat gets wet. Suddenly, you've created the perfect breeding ground for salt-tolerant bacteria. This is the paradox that destroyed European food preservation in the tropics. They'd salt their meat perfectly in cold European ports, then sail toward the equator. Within weeks, their preserved meat would be rotting from the inside out. The problem wasn't their salt technique, it was the air itself. The Chinese Navy's solution? Cut off the air supply completely. They used ceramic jars sealed with Chinese white wax. Now you might be thinking, wax, that's their big secret? But this wasn't ordinary candle wax, this was insect wax. Chinese white wax comes from scale insects, specifically insects like Ericeris pella. These creatures produce a hard, crystalline wax with an incredibly high melting point. It's completely water insoluble. It doesn't crack under pressure, and it creates an absolutely airtight seal. Here's their process. First, pack the salted meat into glazed ceramic jars. Second, pour molten wax over the lid while it's still liquid. Third, let it cool and harden into an impenetrable barrier. The result? A hermetic seal that would make modern engineers jealous. Think about this for a second. You can dry out a sponge perfectly, squeeze out every single drop of water. But if you leave that sponge in a steamy bathroom overnight, what happens? It soaks up moisture from the air, gets moldy, becomes useless. That's exactly what happens to salted meat in tropical humidity. The Navy's breakthrough was putting the sponge in a waterproof container. No air gets in, no moisture penetrates, no rot develops. They created what scientists now call an anaerobic environment, a space completely devoid of oxygen. Inside that sealed jar, there's no oxygen for aerobic bacteria to breathe, no moisture seeping in from the outside world. It's a biological time capsule. Modern food science calls this modified atmosphere packaging. We use this principle for everything from coffee beans to potato chips. The rule is elegantly simple. Remove oxygen, prevent oxidation and bacterial growth. But here's the thing that should blow your mind. We didn't invent this technology in the 1940s with vacuum sealers. The Chinese Navy was creating oxygen-free storage environments in the 1400s using nothing but ceramic and insect wax. Historical records show they stored these sealed jars in the coolest parts of the ship, down near the waterline, where temperatures stayed relatively stable. This technique has been replicated under modern conditions. Salted pork was sealed in a ceramic jar using food-grade wax and stored at room temperature for several months. When the seal was broken, There was no mould, no rot, no foul odour. The wax barrier had completely prevented moisture and oxygen intrusion. This is not an argument for eating preserved food from the 15th century, rather a demonstration of engineering precision. Vacuum sealing is often treated as a modern invention. In reality, oxygen-free storage was already being achieved 5 centuries earlier using ceramic and wax. The Chinese Navy did not possess modern biochemical theory. What they possessed was something equally powerful: repeatable results. At this stage, 2 defences were complete. Salt eliminated bacterial life by removing water. Wax sealed the system from oxygen and humidity. But one threat remained, one that could not be blocked by walls or seals: chemistry itself. Even in oxygen-free environments, fats slowly degrade. Proteins break down. Time continues its work. To overcome this final enemy, a 3rd defense was introduced: a chemical shield that altered the meat at the molecular level, slowing decay from within. This final layer transformed preservation from protection into control. So now picture this: bacteria are dead. Oxygen is sealed out. Your meat sits in its ceramic tomb, perfectly preserved. But there's still one enemy lurking inside: fat oxidation. Even without bacteria, even without oxygen from the outside, fat molecules slowly break down over time. They react with trace amounts of oxygen trapped in the tissue, form free radicals, go rancid. And rancid fat isn't just disgusting to eat, it's genuinely toxic. It causes violent nausea, vomiting, and in severe cases, death by poisoning. The Navy needed their meat to last for months, sometimes up to a full year. Salt and wax could stop bacteria and external oxygen, but they couldn't stop the chemistry happening inside the meat itself, unless they used a secret ingredient that changed everything: nitrates. Now, they didn't call them nitrates. They had no idea what nitrates even were, but they knew through centuries of trial and error that certain salts worked better than others. Salts from specific regions, salts with slightly different colours or textures. These special salts contain natural nitrates from mineral deposits. Here's the chemistry that was happening. Nitrate molecules get reduced to nitrite. Nitrite generates nitric oxide. Nitric oxide binds to myoglobin, the protein in muscle tissue that stores oxygen. This creates a compound called nitrosamioglobin. And nitrosamioglobin does 2 incredible things. First, it turns the meat pink. That's why cured meats like ham and bacon are pink instead of grey. Second, and this is the key, it prevents lipid oxidation from happening. Think of rust spreading across a piece of metal. That's oxidation. Oxygen molecules attacking iron, breaking it down, destroying it. The exact same process happens to fat molecules in meat. Oxygen attacks the fat. The fat breaks down, becomes rancid, becomes toxic. But nitric oxide acts like a molecular bodyguard. It intercepts oxygen molecules before they can attack the fat. It scavenges free radicals. It stabilizes the tissue at the cellular level. The meat doesn't just stay preserved, it becomes chemically resistant to decay. Modern food scientists use sodium nitrite in bacon, ham, and hot dogs for exactly this reason. It's one of the most effective preservatives we have in our entire arsenal. Here's the part that should blow your mind. When you buy bacon at the grocery store today, the label says cured with sodium nitrite. That's the exact same chemistry the Ming Navy was using 6 centuries ago. Ming Dynasty. Use salt from the northern mines. It preserves meat better. Modern food label, sodium chloride, sodium nitrite. Same thing, different vocabulary. 3 layers now complete. Salt executes bacteria at the molecular level. Wax seals out oxygen and moisture. Nitrates stop chemistry itself from destroying the meat. 3 barriers, 3 different sciences, 1 incredible system. But here's what makes this story even more remarkable. They weren't the only ones solving this problem. And the alternative solution? It's the complete opposite approach. So the Imperial Navy had resources: mountains of bulk salt, ceramic jars, expensive insect wax. But what if you didn't have access to the Emperor's treasury? What if you were a pirate crew operating on a shoestring budget in the same deadly waters? Pirates faced the identical problem: tropical heat, rotting food, months at sea with no resupply. But they couldn't afford the Navy's sophisticated three-layer system. They needed something faster, cheaper, more accessible. Pirates used fermentation. Instead of killing all bacteria, they weaponized good bacteria against bad bacteria. Here's how their system worked. Take your meat or fish, pack it in salt, but use much less salt than the Navy's method required. Then add a starter culture, or simply let the natural bacteria already on the food do their work. Lactobacillus bacteria, the good bacteria, start multiplying rapidly. They consume sugars in the tissue and produce lactic acid as waste. The pH plummets. The environment becomes intensely acidic. Picture two armies fighting for control of a fortified castle. The Navy's approach: kill everyone trying to get through the gates, seal the entrances, post armed guards. Nobody gets in, period. The pirates' approach: fill the castle completely with your own loyal soldiers. Pack it so full of allies that there's literally no room for enemies to establish a foothold. Both strategies work perfectly. One uses death, the other uses life. The Navy creates a sterile environment where absolutely nothing can grow. Pirates create a living environment where only the right organisms can thrive. Lactobacillus bacteria produce lactic acid that drops the pH to around 4.5 or lower. Most spoilage bacteria and dangerous pathogens simply cannot survive below pH 4.6. They also produce bacteriocins, natural antibiotics that actively kill competing bacteria. It's microbial warfare happening at the cellular level. Fresh meat sits at pH 5.5 to 6.5, perfect conditions for bacteria to thrive and multiply. Fermented meat drops to pH 4.0 to 4.5. Bad bacteria die off rapidly. The trade-offs were clear. Navy method: high infrastructure costs, long shelf life, requires significant resources. Pirate method: low infrastructure costs, shorter shelf life, but requires skill and timing. Navy: months of preparation time, years of storage capability. Pirates: days of preparation time, months of storage capability. Historical food records and ethnographic studies of coastal Chinese communities reveal a consistent pattern. Salt-fermented fish was a dietary staple for centuries. Families would prepare it in ceramic crocks. It would last for months without spoiling. The technique spread organically from coastal villages to pirate crews to merchant trading ships. It's the exact same biological principle as kimchi, sauerkraut, or pickled vegetables. Different cultures, same underlying biology. We think of food preservation as killing germs to keep food safe, but fermentation is the complete opposite philosophy. It's using germs as weapons in a microscopic war. It's ecological warfare at the cellular level. Pirates understood that you don't need to sterilize food if you can control which bacteria win the battle. So now we have two completely different solutions to the identical problem. Navy, sterilization, hermetic sealing, chemical defense, pirates. Biological colonization, acid warfare, controlled decomposition. But here's the question that ties this entire story together. Why does any of this matter in this day and age? Because the fundamental math hasn't changed at all. Let's fast forward 600 years into the future. It's 1969. NASA engineers are preparing for the Apollo moon missions. They need to send food into the vacuum of space. The food must last for weeks, survive extreme temperature fluctuations, cannot spoil under any circumstances. Sound familiar? Here's exactly what NASA did. They used dehydration to remove available water. They used vacuum sealing to remove oxygen completely. They used chemical stabilizers to prevent oxidation reactions. dehydration, vacuum sealing, chemical stabilizers, that's salt, wax seals, nitrates. NASA used the exact same three-barrier system as the Ming treasure fleet. The only difference? We can now explain scientifically why it works. The ancient Chinese just knew empirically that it did work. Look at modern applications everywhere. Military MRAs, salt for dehydration, oxygen absorber packets, chemical preservatives, commercial beef jerky, salt curing, vacuum packaging, sodium nitrite, canned goods, salt brining, hermetic sealing, sometimes nitrate compounds. Every single modern preservation method follows the same three-layer principle. Ming Dynasty, 1405, salt, insect wax, nitrate-rich mineral salts. NASA, 1969, dehydration, vacuum sealing, chemical stabilizers. Your kitchen, 2026, salt, plastic wrap, synthetic preservatives. Same physics, same chemistry, different materials and technology. Thinking about this, every time you open a package of beef jerky, you're eating food preserved using techniques perfected by sailors wearing silk robes on wooden ships 600 years ago. 1405, treasure fleet sails with molecularly preserved meat. 1940s, vacuum sealing technology gets invented. 1960s, NASA applies same principles for space food. 2026, we're still using the identical three-barrier system. It feels like the ending point of a long journey. Don't you think so? Three barriers against decay: salt that executes bacteria at the molecular level, wax that seals out oxygen and moisture completely, nitrates that stop chemistry itself from destroying tissue. The Chinese treasure fleet didn't just preserve meat for a long voyage. They engineered a system that kept 27,000 men alive and healthy for months at sea, in conditions that killed thousands of European sailors. Here's what you can take away from this story. The problems we face today aren't actually new problems. They've been solved before, just with different tools and materials. Ancient engineers weren't less intelligent than modern engineers. They just had different resources to work with. But the physics, the chemistry, the biology, none of that has changed. So the next time you look at history, don't ask how primitive were they. Ask what did they understand that we've forgotten. Because somewhere in the past, someone already solved your problem. You just have to find their solution. If you want more deep dives into ancient technology that surprises you, subscribe and hit the bell. Because every single week, we're going to reverse engineer another piece of primitive technology and prove that ancient doesn't mean simple. It means we forgot how brilliant they really were. I'll see you in the next one.